And welcome back. We're officially kicking off our first segment, which is a discussion, a panel discussion this morning on the UNCAC and where we have been so far over the past 3 years since we signed on to that convention. With us this morning is the president of the Belize network of NGOs, Osmany Salas. Good morning. We also have the president of the National Trade Union Congress of Belize, Marvin Mora. And we also have the representative of the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Giacomo Sanchez.
Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
We were having a discussion prior to opening up this segment that today we're actually celebrating 3 years. It's our third anniversary of having signed on to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Is it a milestone, or where are we since that endorsement? Where do we begin?
It is a milestone, but before I comment, a quick correction, Isani, in the introduction. I am not the president of the Belize Network of NGOs. I'm the senator representing them.
No problem.
But Ms. Froila Salam is the
president,
chairperson of the network.
Yeah.
Stand
That's a
corrected.
quick correction.
No problem. That's
Yeah.
fine.
It is a milestone. 3 years ago, after a lot of effort and advocacy on the part of the business community and the teachers of our country. If you recall, October 2016, this country was shut down for about 11 days.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the demands made was for the government to sign on to UNCAC,
That's right.
and which was done exactly 3 years ago today.
Right.
So that is a milestone that we signed on to that convention, because I recall, and the BNN did not exist at the time. I recall that the Prime Minister saying that it would be extremely challenging if we would sign on to UNCAC to implement it, extremely costly, which really, has made many people question the political will to implement UNCAC, even from its signing 3 years ago. But it is still a milestone that we have signed on to that convention, and here we are 3 years later.
Can I get some response from you guys as well, insofar as what you've seen take place over the past 3 years in respect of UNCAC?
Not much. The first that was indeed an accomplishment was the establishment of the steering committee.
Yeah.
That would, in essence, be responsible for the monitoring of the implementation of some of the recommendations. We've also seen the review that has been done already that basically assesses the country's ability to function in areas to address certain areas of anti-corruption. But that in itself is not an accomplishment if the recommendations are not put in place, or if there is nothing done to address the areas where we're lax and we need some tightening up. So for the NTUCB, this has been more than frustrating, because we've had people attending the meetings, and the meetings are not happening. So what can we say other than the facts?
So what are you saying? It's no longer a priority?
Well, apparently that would seem to be the order of the day for the government.
There's a bit of information I'd like to get out before we move into looking at where we are today. And Giacomo, you can help us with this. There are actually, once you sign on to a convention, there's certain steps that have to take place, which includes kind of like getting your baseline, where are you, whatnot. And those were processes that took a bit of time as well. Can you shed some light on that?
To the extent of the process in getting us where we are in terms of at least the country assessment.
Yes.
There had to be quite a bit of, in terms of the learning curve. So there were some visits to Vienna by our public officials, and they came back, imparted the information. And so there was a lot of momentum created in terms of ensuring that we at least target the first two components of the convention, having to do with preventative measures and criminalization and law enforcement. So with the gap assessment having been completed, that set the stage for the folks from Tuvalu to visit and do their assessment, and with the help of now seeing the executive summary out of that process. I think we've lost some momentum and focus, and I think at least from the I must thank the civil society partners for inviting the chamber, as we always get together, because I mean, like everyone else, we want to see where we maintain the fight, so to speak, to ensure that there is some impact as it relates to how our country is governed, not only now but going into the future.
Yeah. And so there was the country assessment that had to be done. We had visiting nations, Tuvalu and Haiti, had to come in to see where we are in terms of the level of corruption, what's in place, what kind of preventative measures exist. I know we also had teams go out to other countries as well. I think you went to Jamaica.
We had a delegation.
See some of the work that had been implemented there.
And that was a very useful visit.
Yes.
We had the opportunity, Mr. Sanchez and I and others from the project board, led by the Solicitor General at the time, Mr. Hawk, Nigel Hawk, went on a visit to Jamaica. We met with several of their commissions, the Office of the Contractor General, their Integrity Commission, their Electoral Commission, and a number of other bodies. And they were open with us. And even though Jamaica itself is battling with corruption, what really struck me is that they have been putting systems in place. And we can compare to a great extent Belize and Jamaica, and we came back with some excellent ideas. So as Mr. Sanchez was saying earlier, 2017 into 2018 was an active period at the project board that was set up to oversee the implementation of the UNCAC convention. But as of August 2018, I believe, when the representative of the UN office here in UNDP office here in Belize left, things really slowed almost to a crawl, and now since February 2019 the project board has not met, despite our 3 organizations represented here have written to the government, to the Attorney General. The Attorney General's ministry is the focal point for UNCAC in Belize. We have written to them and reminded them, not a response, not even an acknowledgement.
And this is, the execution lies within the Attorney General's ministry. That is the office that spearheads this process.
And for good reason.
Because there are a lot of legislative changes that have to be made as well.
Well, not only that, I think what's important, if you go back to when the convention was actually put together by the UN, Kofi Annan did say, something, countries have to have buy-in.
Exactly.
And that's what's lacking in our case. I think we need to press the restart button on buying in. And it's not just the citizenry, it has to be our public officials.
I really want to touch on that, because buy-in is important. And I think that if we look back on how we got to the signing of the UNCAC, it wasn't necessarily buy-in.
No.
It was the teachers shutting down this country,
public
saying
pressure.
We are not going to resume classes until all these issues are dealt with. And one of them was signing on to the UNCAC. Now, addressing corruption is something that takes great political will, and even some political pundits will say political suicide, because the tentacles, how far they reach, and the involvement of the people, it means you're kind of looking at your own self in the mirror and seeing, what am I turning a blind eye to or actually participating in? And so I think we can safely say there wasn't a buy-in, there was a pressure. And as a member of the public, it feels like, okay, so it was done, it was signed, there was activity to kind of give people the illusion of work happening, and then rightly so, as we always make the joke, it blew over like a breeze, and now no one's paying attention to the UNCAC anymore.
I think we can simply put it this way. the political will to implement UNCAC in Belize does not exist. It does not exist. And as some of us have said repeatedly, even without signing on to the UNCAC, there are many things that we could have already done and been doing. Good example is the Integrity Commission, which we could talk about later, the Office of the Contractor General, and a number of other offices like that. And we could talk about these examples, but there is very little to none. One other
because
example
we still haven't had a contractor general come in to replace the last one, correct?
Yeah, well, the legislation was just amended to according to the government, the way they justify it is for the pool to get larger from where they could select somebody to be contractor general. But therein lies a lot of questions.
Can you look at that at face value? So the contractor general, the reason we're told we can't get a contractor general is because that person has to make a commitment to say they're not going to take on any government contracts for a period of time. In other words, I won't get the job, secure myself for when I leave, which we have seen happen. That was part of the reason
but that's only a part
that
of it, you know.
That it was explained.
That is only a part of it. Who in their right mind, who really wants to do a good job, would want to take up such a position with no support, no secretariat support? The Office of the Contractor General, if I could refer to their latest report, which is 2015, some months ago they submitted 5 annual reports, you know, which tells you that for 5 years there were no reports from the Contractor General, which is why the Senate decided not to appoint the previous office holder. But in 2015, the Contractor General himself said that they needed 5 other officers within the office to support them: a legal counsel, a chief investigator, an information systems analyst, and an inspector for construction and non-construction projects.
And to date, none of that has happened.
None of that. It's just the Contractor General, and which is vacant at this time, and 2 office support staff. So the work of the Contractor General, of the CG or the Contractor General, is not just to review bids. It's the bidding process in its entirety. It's also going on the ground to see how contracts are being implemented. It's not meant to be an office job. So, but that's how it has been over all these years.
So in the face of all of that, nonetheless, is the fact that government still continues to put bids for put contracts out there and what have you, aside from the fact that the office is vacant. Correct?
Asani, let me break it down to you. Nobody in their right mind, like how Mr. Salas explained, would take on that job, because it would be basically taking a job where you're being set up to fail. The amount of contracts that you have to review for an entire year, you would have to review over 100 contracts per month in their entirety, from going into the letter of the contract, piece by piece, the text of the contract, to be able to ascertain that the contract itself is something that we can live with, that it is fair for both sides, and that it meets all legal requirements. Then you have to go again, do your field visits, and ensure that all the things that need to be there, the standards are met, and so forth. So there is no way that office can function with 1 or 2 people. That has to be a very fully staffed. Fully staffed.
And that seems to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, a challenge with a lot of the structural systems that we have on paper. I'll give the example of the Public Accounts Committee. There is a committee, they convene, they meet, but they're discussing issues from many years ago. So while we may be addressing corruption or perhaps improper processes that took place 5 years ago, those very same practices may continue into today, which means we'll never catch up with fixing the problem if we're always looking in history rather than dealing with present. And so my question is, we've signed on to the convention. I recall that conversation after the visit to Jamaica, and they were very progressive in terms of changing the very same issue that we're talking about, that structurally, if you're going to put checks and balances in place, it has to be effective. It can't just be for face value to say there is an integrity commission, there is a contractor general, there is a public accounts committee.
Hence the reason we're not getting any buy-in, because no one wants to relinquish an ounce of power in who holds the reign to power in Belize. So that is our challenge. We spoke about earlier the public pressure.
Yeah.
That's a quandary for us because it's difficult to urge our government to go in, or any government to go in a direction that they don't want when there's no incentive. And the argument could be made that, well, because we have individuals not being affected directly in their pocketbooks. So because it's this considered sort of out there, where it's just corruption, it's not affecting me personally. So there's no kind of groundswell or interest in any kind of movement to say we need to get this, because that's where the development of our country lies in terms of how progressive we are.
Is that a part of what we have failed to do? I think I attended maybe one session, to be clear, with a bit of sensitization on the UNCAC and looking at corruption. One of the critical points, which I thought was really important, was being able to simply have the proper definitions as to how corruption takes place and where it takes place. And I don't think that that's an issue that we bring to the public very often. We don't discuss it. We say corruption the way we say transparency and accountability, the kind of these lofty phrases that some people understand. But when you talk to someone who is doing their best to simply get by, they don't make a connection between a bloated contract and the fact that they're going to take out a loan every year for school.
Let me address that. There is different levels and types of corruption, right? And the hard and fast reality of it is that corruption cannot exist if the general public officers and us, citizenry, do not support it. But it has been ingrained in our social fabric that it becomes a part of our culture. That's why it's called the culture of corruption, because it becomes part of our culture. It's an endemic society that is, for the lack of a better word, normalized to the fact that they live with corruption in their daily lives. Now, that's one point, right? But the fact is, though, that if policies are in place, regulations, laws, that will drive at addressing the issues that are coming out of corruption, looking at the sources, the factors that drive corruption, and put things in place so that those are avoided, then eventually the society will have to come and follow through. Let me put out a scenario. If it is, like, for example, the Contractor General's office is activated properly and he can do his job, then all those bloated contracts would eventually have to stop because he would be pointing out the areas that are outside of the norm.
He or she,
maybe
we need a woman.
Maybe we need a woman. More than likely it would be a woman. More than likely. Because it would take a lot from somebody, a lot of focus, a lot of drive. And to be honest with you, I come from a place at the NTUCB where we work together with the International Labour Organization. We do many conferences with them at the regional level. And one of the things that we've learned from them is that women are far better managers than men. And that is a fact. Statistics prove that whenever women take over any company or any department that was not functioning, things start to work the correct way. So I would agree.
I have another example, a burning thing that has been on my mind for a couple of days, and perhaps you guys can weigh in as to how it fits into transparency, accountability, and good governance, etc. All of these things. A news story was ran several times on the repair work that is happening on this swing bridge, right? And you're using public funds to be able to address this issue of the decay and the damage that's happening with the bridge. But there was not a bidding process as far as we know. And the exact quantum of how much the contractor is being paid still remains a question, even though certain figures are thrown around loosely or what have you. Point that I'm making is, though, it would seem as if though a heavy focus is placed on central government in the context of UNCAC, but then there are also all of these municipal bodies that deal with public funds as well.
Well, look, I'll respond by referring to what Mr. Mora said about the culture of corruption. We cannot have our cake and eat it too. If the opposition is serious about, if they expect to form the government one day, then they must walk the walk, not only talk the talk. So transparency is needed across the board. Municipal level, central government level, private sector.
That's right.
And we need to point out that this convention does not only refer to the public sector, it's also the private sector. There is a lot of private sector corruption happening.
So I said there's different types
Yes.
of corruption.
Yeah.
But I want to highlight something that you brought up. You mentioned about what the incentive would be for the general public, for the lay persons that are out there. The incentive is the following. If you would take out, and anybody who wants to be challenged and take on the burden of doing some research, if you would take out corruption out of a system, the development that you would get would be exponential. Our standards of living would increase exponentially. So what we're seeking from the government when we are saying, we want the government to do this for me, the government is failing, the government can be addressed if you take out the issue of corruption.
Let me refer very quickly to the challenge there. I agree with everything Mr. Mora is saying, but here is a challenge. In 2018, our same UNCAC project board commissioned a survey to look at the gender aspects of corruption, if you recall, Mr. Sanchez. And it wasn't a scientific survey, but the results were more indicative as a result. But people across this country were surveyed. And what that determined is that the people who are paying or suffering the most from corruption are the ones from the lowest income strata. They're the ones paying the most. Why? They have to pay money to be given attention for their land papers, for example, to be given attention, etc. The higher income persons have more options. They could hire an attorney to do their job for them. They could hire a customs broker. You could call your friend. But the ones in the lowest or lower income brackets, they have to shut up. They have to pay. They're the ones who are really suffering the most out of this.
Hence what I said, they are the ones that are upholding corruption.
Let me give you a simple example. Vital statistics. We've heard stories, all kinds of stories.
Horror
I can never
stories.
forget going to the office one day and meeting a lady that had a toddler and a baby in her hand. She came from Toledo. That was her third visit to Vital Statistics. This is a while back. I'll be clear, maybe 4 years ago. But I just kept thinking, and on that third visit, her documents were still not ready. That was 3 round-trip tickets with her children to Belize City from Toledo for simply doing the process, the regular process. While we know other people are able to get their documents with a little, what I said, grease the pocket or a little help. Much
Express
easier.
service.
And so that's how, even if they don't financially pay, it pays to play it straight
It does.
in this country.
It does.
And you could mention so many more
I mean,
examples.
so that's one example that
The
comes
passport
to mind.
office is another.
Well, that is also another story we can look at. But I'm gonna ask the question, and then we can take a break, give you some time to think of your answers. So, because we talk about corruption, and we very easily point the finger towards government systems, and you're right. It takes a lot more people to be involved, including the private sector, including the public service. So I want to ask, in the absence of the momentum being taken by the government at this time, what's happening within the private sector, within the public service, and even within the advocacy bodies to perhaps do your part in being able to get people sensitized and to push for the proper implementation of UNCAC. And so I'm going to leave that to find out about your personal responsibility. When we come back, we'll get their answers. So please stay tuned.